Hi and very warm welcome at Amish Shackle 5858. I am Amish Shackle. Following news headlines have been reported by world major English news channels and news agencies. So please watch it.
Breaking news as we come on the air. The terrifying scene on a runway in Toronto. A Delta Airlines plane from Minneapolis completely upside down after crash landing with dozens aboard. This airplane just crashed. At least 18 hurt, including a child, critically injured at Canada's busiest airport. Smoke billowing from the fuselage. Fire trucks on the snow-covered tarmac as an air ambulance rushes to the scene. Footage from inside the plane showing passengers evacuating. Tonight, questions over how this could have happened and the growing concerns about aviation safety as hundreds of FAA employees are let go just weeks after that fatal mid-air collision in D.C. The deadly flood emergency in Kentucky, at least 11 killed. The mother and daughter swept away. More than 1,000 rescues. Roads washed out. Entire neighborhoods underwater. Emergency crews racing to reach people still trapped, and the threat isn't over. Plus, we're tracking extreme weather, one of the worst winter cold snaps yet for 67 million Americans. Al Roker standing by. Top American officials head overseas for the highest level meeting between the U.S. and Russia to try and end the war in Ukraine. But President Zelensky not invited. Richard Engel reports tonight from the war zone. And honoring the black caddies who carried so much on their shoulders on one of golf's greatest courses. This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt. This is going to, yet again, raise the concern about FAA staffing, air traffic control staffing. There has been this talk about maybe staff cuts at the FAA as a part of President Trump's effort to trim down the federal workforce. This is going to feed into all of these recent incidents, and the safety of the total air traffic system is going to be very much a part of the conversation.
The left-wing media is already accusing Trump of being a cause of this airline crash, but what's really to blame? Joining me now is Scott Patillo, retired commercial airline pilot, and Kyle Bailey, aviation expert and former FAA safety team representative. Kyle, I gotta ask you, do the potential cuts to the FAA and other parts of the federal government have anything to do with what's going on right now?
From what I see at this point, they have zero to do with this accident. It's not a matter of staffing. They had nothing to do with this at all. I can tell you that right now.
So, Scott, I realize that it's pretty impossible to tell from just this dramatic footage what happened, but you have a wing that is completely sheared off, and you have 40-mile-an-hour winds, as Eric Shawn reported. Can you give us any sort of indication as to what you think might have, what are the range of possibilities of what might have happened here?
Certainly, Charlie. There's a number of things that come to mind. Landing in a crosswind on a low-wing airplane like this is very tricky. Experienced pilots that do this day in and day out have got a little bit of an edge, and we're aware of what's going on with the aircraft. You can never give up on it. If the pilot was unstable as he's coming down on the approach, and I'm not saying that he was, but if he were, then that adds complexity to the equation as well. If his seat rate is high, if his airspeed is fast as he's coming down, the controls that he's going to put in on the normally will act slightly different, and he can over-exaggerate the flight control surfaces, making it quite easy to catch a wing.
Tonight, as we come on the air in the West, we do have breaking news that Delta flight crashing while landing in Toronto. And tonight, what authorities have just revealed late this evening. The flight from Minneapolis crashing the jet upside down on the tarmac, the wings sheared off, the flames, the passengers, and their escape.
We just landed. Our plane crashed
It's upside down.
Passengers recording the moments just after getting out of the cabin. Firefighters racing to hose down the fuselage. 80 passengers and crew unbuckling their seatbelts while hanging upside down. Everyone getting out, but there is word tonight of multiple injuries, including a child. Authorities tonight trying to determine if weather, gusting winds, and snow on the runway were factors. You will hear from the passengers right here. Gio Benitez and retired Colonel Pilot Steve Ganyard also here tonight on the early signs what might have caused this. Also tonight, the storm hitting the east now, the new storm right behind it. 140 million Americans on alert yet again. Already those high wind warnings from New York up to Boston. Winds gusting up to 75 miles per hour. In Philadelphia, a woman killed when a tree fell on her car. In New York City tonight, trees crashing on top of homes in Queens, the Bronx. The flood emergency in Kentucky, the death toll there expected to rise. And now this new storm. Ginger Z has the forecast. She'll time this out. Tonight, the White House defending Elon Musk's team over attempts to obtain access to the system that contains the tax filings and bank statements of millions of Americans. What do they need it for? As the Trump administration now fires hundreds from the FAA, Homeland Security, and the CDC. Tonight, the high-stakes talks the U.S. and Russia set to begin to try to end the war in Ukraine. Ukraine, not part of these talks. And European leaders now holding emergency meetings as well, concerned by what they're hearing and seeing. New York City Mayor Eric Adams tonight, the Justice Department dropping the corruption case, but tonight 4 of the mayor's top deputies now resigning over this, after 7 prosecutors resigned 2 against the move. Tonight, the measles outbreak in part of the U.S. rising and new cases right across state lines. The price of eggs hitting a new record high, the cost for a dozen eggs jumping 80 cents in just a month. And the images right here tonight, the seal found right in the middle of the street in the Northeast. Where did the seal come from? And what they did to save the pup. From ABC News World Headquarters in New York, this is World News Tonight.
Just landed. Our plane crashed.
80 people land in Toronto upside down. And 80 people leave the plane alive.
From CBS News headquarters in New York, this is the CBS Evening News.
Good evening, I'm John Dickerson. I'm Maurice Dubois. Have a look at this picture again. That is Delta Flight 4819 from Minneapolis-St. Paul, lying on its back this afternoon at the airport in Toronto after flipping over on landing. 80 people escaped with their lives, a miracle, but there are a number of serious injuries. If anyone needed a graphic reminder of how important it is to buckle up before landing, this is it. So how did this happen? Senior transportation correspondent Chris Van Cleve joins us now from Phoenix. Chris.
John and Maurice, the fact everybody walked away, truly a miracle, as you said. But just how this plane ended up upside down remains a giant unanswered question. The NTSB and FAA have investigators on the way to aid in this investigation.
Chris, it appears that everybody had their seatbelt on. How much of a difference did that make when you talked to experts today?
Well, Robert Sumwalt, former NTSB chair, really keyed into that. You know, those seats are designed to withstand 16 times the force of gravity, but they only really work if you're wearing your seatbelt. The fact everybody was able to get out, a testament not only to those seats, but to buckling up.
Chris, for all the people who look at all these plane incidents over the past several weeks and wonder, is it safe to fly? What are the experts telling you?
You know, they say that fundamentally nothing has changed in our aviation system despite this series of high-profile accidents we've been talking about for the last 3 weeks. There are still multiple layers of safety that allow 45,000 planes to take off and land in the U.S. safely every day. Fundamentally, that hasn't changed. They say it's safe to fly.
Okay, Chris Van Cleve.
Breaking news. A plane crashes at Canada's largest airport.
We were seeing some black smoke coming from the runway.
The flight that slipped over, the condition of those on board, and the investigation getting underway.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Colleen Christie.
Everything, drop it. Come on. Don't take it down. Unverified unverified video seemingly capturing the moment dozens of passengers on board this Delta Airlines plane at Toronto's Pearson International Airport get out of the aircraft after it flipped upside down in a crash landing. All passengers and crew are reportedly accounted for, but there are reports of injuries. Good evening. Thanks for joining us. Reportedly accounted for, but there are reports of injuries. Good evening. Thanks for joining us. The situation is developing at this country's largest airport. Many details are still scarce, but we do know the plane was carrying 4 crew and 76 passengers. 22 Canadians were among those on board. We begin with Eric Sorensen, who is at the airport. Eric, what more do you know?
It was a remarkable scene here this afternoon at Pearson Airport, Colleen. A regional jet out of Minneapolis being run by Endeavour Aircraft on behalf of Delta Airlines was flying in to Toronto this afternoon when the plane crash landed and flipped over onto its roof. Remarkably, no one was killed. There were injuries. Estimates of around 15 or so people injured, a few serious. One child was reported to have been carried by Orange Air ambulance to Sick Children's Hospital. Here's what one eyewitness had to say about what he saw.
We were doing some plane spotting over on that plaza over there at the intersection, and we saw something, some big smoke coming over the airport. So we rushed here to check out what exactly was happening. So I was walking to this fence, and I could see CRJ that is possibly crashed on the airport. The airplane itself flipped.
We are very focused on the care and the concern and the passengers and the...
Today, the Reserve Bank widely expected to cut interest rates for the first time since 2020. Also ahead, Russia again urged to release Australian Oscar Jenkins after an unverified video emerged of him in captivity. Up to 18 injured after a plane flips onto its roof while landing at a Toronto airport.
What we can say is the runway was dry and there was no crosswind conditions.
And calls for a curriculum overhaul after civics literacy falls to its worst level since 2004. Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm Ross Childs. Hello and a very warm welcome. If you're just joining us here at France 24, you're watching Daybreak. These are our top stories this hour. US-Russian bilateral talks in Saudi Arabia are primarily aimed at resetting abnormal relations, so says Moscow. They are, however, expected to discuss the war in Ukraine. Both sides saying no instant deal will be sealed on that front. European leaders, however, feeling left out, they pledge instead to increase their own military spending. Missing their deadline, Israeli troops still in southern Lebanon in conflict with the terms of the ceasefire deal they signed. People who had been forced to flee their homes still waiting to return. And turning upside down on touchdown, a Delta Airlines plane lands on its roof in Toronto. Not yet clear what caused the aircraft to flip over. Passengers injured, but no fatalities reported.
Good morning, it's 7 o'clock, a huge day for Ukraine. The United States and Russia meet for talks in Riyadh to try and end the war.
But with Europe and Ukraine shut out, there are growing fears about what Donald Trump could give away. We'll speak to government in the next few minutes.
It's Tuesday, the 18th of February. Your headlines. The Prime Minister urges the US to back a European peacekeeping force in Ukraine as negotiations start to end the war.
Here in Ukraine, there's huge concern about the future, but it's a determination that Kyiv must be at the negotiating table in any peacekeeping talks.
Also ahead, a miracle escape for all 80 passengers and crew from a burning plane upside down on a runway in Toronto. Sky News reports on the organised crime gangs making millions from illegally dumping rubbish. Plus,
only only, 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 only you, only, only.
Who taking home the big prizes at the Mobo Awards tonight?
You, I was chasing hard.
A very good morning to you. It's a huge day for the future of Ukraine.
Hello everyone, let's check the headline news this hour. The US and Russia have announced that they will appoint teams to negotiate ending the war in Ukraine. The development comes following high-level talks between the pair in Saudi Arabia, nearly 3 years after Moscow began a full-scale offensive on Kyiv. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says the pair are committed to ending the war in Ukraine in a fair way, while Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov hailed the conversation with Washington as useful.
There has to be concessions made by all sides. We're not going to predetermine what those are. We're certainly not going to negotiate this today or in a press conference for that matter. But and there are other parties that have sanctions. The European Union is going to have to be at the table at some point because they have sanctions as well that have been imposed. So, but I guess the point here is the goal is, and we agreed on what the goal is. The goal is to bring an end to this conflict in a way that's fair, enduring, sustainable, and acceptable to all parties involved.
Разговор был, я считаю, очень полезный. Мы не просто слушали, но и слышали друг друга. И у меня есть основания полагать, что американская сторона стала лучше понимать нашу позицию, которую мы на основе многократных выступлений президента Путина подробно на конкретных примерах изложили в очередной раз.
The Kremlin added that Russian President Vladimir Putin is prepared to speak with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, quote, if necessary. Mr. Zelensky was not invited to today's talks led by Washington and Moscow. He has since slammed the discussions for going ahead without Ukraine, saying that his country will reject any outcome from negotiations that do not involve Kyiv. Hamas says it will release 6 living Israeli hostages still held in Gaza on Saturday. It comes after a deal was reached with Hamas in Cairo to bring forward the release of hostages over the weekend. The militant group added that the bodies of 4 Israeli captives will also be handed over on Thursday. Singapore bunch of Singaporeans in the country immediate costs of living pressures, as well as helping businesses and workers remain competitive amid challenging times ahead. In terms of fiscal position, Singapore did better than expected for the past financial year. Mr. Wong pointed to the upside in corporate income tax, now the largest contributor to the total revenue.
We will continue to monitor fiscal trends closely and update our medium-term projections. In the meantime, we will spend responsibly and ensure resources are allocated effectively. If and when there are near-term fiscal upsides, we will put the resources to good use, including for our social and economic needs.
And that is the latest from the CNA Newsroom. China as the UN Security Council's president.
10 people were killed and 3 others injured when a 3-story residential building collapsed in Egypt Monday morning. The incident took place in Kadasa city, located in the western part of Greater Cairo. In response, the health ministry deployed rescuers and ambulances to the scene, working to clear the rubble and search for survivors. Giza Governor Adel Al-Nagard ordered the immediate evacuation of nearby buildings as a safety measure. The collapse was reported at around 5 a.m. and local authorities acted quickly to secure the area.
who has been in detention since his abduction from Kenya on November 16, 2024, is infirm and experiences episodes of hypertension, according to his lawyer, Arias Lukwago. All detention hangers some days protesting of his arrest and detention. The military tribunal in Kampala has charged Besige and an assistant with offenses related to illegal possession of a firearm and threatening national security. Besige also faces a separate charge of treachery, a crime that carries the death penalty.
At the African Union Summit in the Ethiopian capital Addis Ababa, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres issued a stern warning. Speaking on Saturday, he said the Democratic Republic of Congo's territorial integrity must be respected and the conflict in the east of the country halted.
In the Democratic Republic of the Congolese people have been suffering yet again from a brutal cycle of violence. And the fighting that is raging in South Kivu as a result of the continuation of the M23 offensive threatens to push the entire region over the precipice. Regional escalation must be avoided at all costs. There is no military solution. The deadlock must end, the dialogue must begin, and the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the DRC must be respected.
The Rwanda-backed M23 rebels have captured swathes of the DRC's mineral-rich eastern region, including the key city of Goma, and on Friday said it had entered the second-largest city, Bukavu.
The French Culture Minister Rachida Dati visited the disputed Western Sahara on Monday during a trip to Morocco to strengthen cultural ties with the North African nation. Dati and a delegation of representatives of French cultural institutions made visits to the Moroccan-controlled cities of Laayoune and Dakhla in the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic. It is a political moment, a symbolic moment, and also a great historical and cultural moment because my 3 visits will witness the signing of agreements in the various fields of culture. The Moroccan observers have trumpeted the visit as a victory, further cementing their presence in the disputed territory. In addition to deepening their political ties, Rabat and Paris also agreed to boost cultural cooperation through a new roadmap and letter of intent of video game production. Culture at the service of citizens. Culture is history, is heritage, is restoration of this heritage, is also defending the Hassani Sahrawi culture. We are in the southern provinces to push and encourage the Moroccan Hassani culture. Though international courts have reaffirmed the local residents' right to self-determination, Western nations have gradually backed Morocco. First decision to do so last year vaulted Franco-Moroccan relation to an all-time high.
The Colombian icon Shakira was reported to have left Lima Hospital on Sunday after cancelling her concert in the city due to health issues. Local news outlets indicated that she departed Clínica Delgado just hours after being admitted for abdominal ailment. On Sunday afternoon, Shakira took to her Instagram and X accounts to share that her doctors advised her against performing. In her message, Shakira expressed her desire to recover quickly. Shakira arrived in Peru on Friday evening with performances scheduled for Sunday and Monday. This marks the second stop on her Latin American tour, following 2 successful nights in Brazil last week. The singer is on a tour to promote her latest album, Las Mujeres Ya No Logran, which reflects her highly publicized divorce through music.
Neymar scored his first goal for Santos since returning to Brazil when he converted a penalty Sunday in a 3-1 win over Sao Paulo Bay's Agua Santa. So far, Neymar has not managed to play all 90 minutes in a match for Santos. His performances were below par in the first 3 games for the club, but he showed some improvement on Sunday as he continues his recovery from any injury. Neymar officially returned to soccer in October after an entire year out. He confirmed last month that his contract with Saudi club Al Hilal had been terminated by mutual consent. He had an injury-marred spell at Al Hilal where he played only 7 matches and scored once. Neymar has signed a 6-month contract with Santos, which he said could be extended later.
Sneakers of every hue were showcased at ANB Arena in Riyadh during SneakerCon. Thank you very much for giving time to Amir Shackle 5858. I am Amir Shackle. Have a good life. Bye-bye.